preparing to vote. The House of Representatives must decide whether to go forward with the impeachment probe into President Donald Trump. Denying Holy Communion. After a leading Democratic presidential candidate is refused the Blessed Sacrament, we learn more about what the church teaches. Fight for the unborn. We have analysis of several state pro-life measures now facing challenges. And praying for peace. Pope Francis seeks solutions to violent protests in Iraq. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, October 30th, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby. The impeachment inquiry into President Donald Trump faces a critical vote in Congress. The Democratic-led House of Representatives will decide tomorrow if key committees should keep investigating the president. But Republicans are concerned the vote will result in a violation of due process. White House correspondent Mark Irons joins us with the details. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. Democrats compare the committee's role in the investigation to a fact-finding grand jury proceeding. If that is the case, the accused does not have the rights to an attorney. Now, tomorrow's vote will be the first on this impeachment inquiry. President Trump continues to say the whole process is illegitimate and unfair.
President Trump on Twitter blasts Democrats for the impeachment process he calls a disgrace and says Republicans are very unified and energized in our fight on the impeachment hoax.
I'm really concerned about the rush to judgment here and the way this is being conducted.
Lawmakers will soon go on the record regarding the investigation. The House Rules Committee has released the resolution that's expected to be voted on Thursday. The resolution is a sign that public hearings are forthcoming. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, the testimonies continue on Capitol Hill, and Democrats continue to lay out the concerns at the center of the impeachment probe.
If all the president did was ask the Ukrainian president to investigate his opponent, that would be a gross abuse of power. But he did more than that. He leveraged $391 million in taxpayer dollars over the Ukrainian president.
The president claims he did nothing wrong and points to the public transcript of his call with the president of Ukraine. He tweets, "Just a casual reading of the transcript leads everybody to see that the call with the Ukrainian president was a totally appropriate one."
Army officer Alexander Vindman is reportedly willing to testify publicly in this probe. He did testify behind closed doors yesterday for more than 10 hours, and he was the first official to testify who was actually on that call between President Trump and the Ukrainian president. Wyatt.
White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. The American Bar Association does not want the Senate to approve one of President Trump's judicial nominees. They rated Lawrence Van Dyke not qualified because they believe he would be unfair to people with same-sex attraction. Van Dyke choked up today when senators questioned him about that criticism.
Did you say that you wouldn't be fair to members of the LGBT community?
Sorry. No, I did not say that. I do not believe that. It is a fundamental belief of mine that all people are created in the image of God. They should all be treated with dignity and respect.
Senator Mike Lee is pushing for a hold on the American Bar Association's advanced role in vetting the nominees until an investigation can be done to determine if they are unbiased. Van Dyke is the former Solicitor General of Nevada and has bipartisan support from organizations in the state. Tonight, we take a closer look at a Catholic priest's decision this past Sunday to deny communion to former Vice President and Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden, because Biden, a lifelong Catholic, supports abortion. Father Robert Morey, pastor of St. Anthony Catholic Church in Florence, South Carolina, writes in a statement, quote, "Holy Communion signifies we are one with God, each other, and the Church. Our actions should reflect that. Any public figure who advocates for abortion places himself or herself outside of church teaching." Here to help us explore the issue from a Catholic perspective is Father Thomas Petri, moral theologian and professor at the Dominican House of Studies in Washington, D.C. He's also co-host of the Church Alive Saturday mornings on EWTN Radio. Father, welcome back.
Thank you.
What are your thoughts just initially about Father Morey's decision?
Well, I think it's a difficult decision. Nobody likes to say no. Nobody likes to exclude somebody. But I think Father made it was an act of mercy. so that Vice President Biden, because he supports manifest public grave sins such as abortion, could, by receiving Holy Communion, be bringing condemnation and judgment upon himself by Almighty God.
I can imagine it's a tough issue for a priest in that situation.
Absolutely. The Code of Canon Law says that those who are obstinately persevering in manifest grave sin should not be admitted to communion. So in that way, Father Maury was just following what the Church teaches. In the United States, so many bishops have said, however, that people should be spoken to beforehand. And when it comes to politicians, they've taken it upon themselves that they will be the ones to approach, especially national politicians like Vice President Biden, former Vice President Biden. But there's no indication publicly whether they're actually approaching them or what priest ought to do in these situations.
It is tough. And former Vice President Biden has said, quote, he practices his faith, but obviously we've heard people say that before and may have a different opinion when they voice as a public official. How should faithful Catholics prepare themselves before presenting themselves for Holy Communion?
Well, I think three things. One is, of course, the Church says you should be free of any grave or mortal sin, that you should not have any be conscious of any sins or serious sins that you've committed. If you have committed them, you need to go to confession. Normally, people need to fast for 1 hour in preparation for this sacred act. But also, if you're a public person, have made public pronouncements of a sinful nature, contrary to the Church's teaching, you really do need to recant those before you come to communion.
And following up with you on that, obviously today we're talking about Joe Biden, but certainly he's not limited. We've heard about all sorts of politicians. We've witnessed their situations who describe themselves as Catholic, but take views against church teaching distinctly. So, and that's whether it's abortion or assisted suicide, a number of other issues. Often they say, though, that they personally feel one way, but they're representing their constituents by voicing this other opinion or voting this other way. Is there any, how do you get through this distinction? Is there any way to separate these two?
Oh, absolutely. I think we vote for people because of what they believe. I mean, that's what democracy is about. We vote for our representatives based on what they say they believe. And if you do not believe that there should be abortion or euthanasia, you say that, and people will vote for you or not, depending on that. That's how democracy works. This distinction that some Catholic politicians are making lacks a consistency, which is to say, especially when we're dealing with real black and white serious sins like abortion and euthanasia, assisted suicide. You have to be consistent. Either you're in favor of the murder of the unborn or you're not. And if you're not in favor of it personally, you can't be in support of it publicly or politically. Let the constituents determine who they're going to vote for based on what you say your beliefs are and how you will act.
It's important to note that. Okay, very good. Well, we appreciate your clarifying all of this because obviously Holy Communion is so important. It's so important that we recognize that as a sacrament. Father Thomas Petri, moral theologian and professor at the Dominican House of Studies and co-host of the Church Alive on Saturday mornings on EWTN Radio. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
The wildfires in California have left nearly 1 million people in the dark. The electric company cut power in a controversial move to keep electric lines from sparking new fires. A new blaze erupted in the Simi Valley near the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library. The building was evacuated but has not yet been damaged. More than 5,000 firefighters are battling the wildfires across the state. Earlier this week, Mount St. Mary's University in California had to evacuate 450 students from its campus. Southern California is under the first ever extreme red flag warnings issued by the National Weather Service. A new ISIS leader will emerge to take the place of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who died in a raid in Syria last weekend. That, according to acting director Russell Travers of the National Counterterrorism Center. But he tells Congress there's another threat that's more pressing.
The homeland violent extremist individual threat is amongst the greatest that we worry about.
FBI Director Christopher Wray says the biggest concern in the United States is the virtual caliphate. It inspires Americans to pledge allegiance to ISIS and commit acts of violence in the group's name. Travers says ISIS has at least 14,000 fighters worldwide. Chile's president cancels 2 important international summits that were to be held in his country. Chile has been the site of 2 weeks of deadly protests over economic inequality. Around 20 people have been killed and hundreds of others have been injured. The United States and China were hoping to finalize a trade agreement to be signed at a meeting in the country's capital next month. Turkey says it strongly condemns 2 measures passed by the U.S. House of Representatives. In a bipartisan effort, lawmakers voted yesterday to recognize the century-old mass killings of Armenians by Ottoman Turks as a genocide. The House also passed a bill to sanction senior Turkish officials for the incursion into northeastern Syria. President Recep Erdogan says both votes are a slander against his country. Pope Francis urges Iraqi authorities to listen to the cry of their people.
Invito le autorità a ascoltare il grido della popolazione.
At today's weekly gathering, the Holy Father asked the international community to look for fair solutions to the problems facing Iraq. More than 200 people have died in violent demonstrations to protest government corruption, a lack of jobs, and poor public services. Pope Francis also expressed his condolences to the families of the victims. The Vatican hosts its 5th formation course for Catholic military chaplains. 130 participants from 47 countries are learning about international humanitarian law and how they can protect the most vulnerable people who often suffer as a result of war. Today, Pope Francis appeared to wipe away tears when British forces returned a Virgin Mary statue to the military bishop of Argentina. The replica of Our Lady of Luján was taken during the Falklands War in 1982. Now, the patroness of Argentina statue is headed back to its homeland. Father Michael Fava, UK Deputy Chaplain General, was at the exchange. He joins us now from Rome. Father Michael, thank you so much for being with us. Tell us about your meeting with Pope Francis today and why this Madonna statue exchange was so important.
Well, the meeting with the Holy Father took place immediately after the public audience. The statue had been very prominently on display throughout the audience, just next to the Holy Father on the days. But he personally took an interest in this event today and wished to bless it and to meet with some of us visitors from Britain and visitors from Argentina. It's an event that's been quite long planned after contact between our Bishop of the Forces and his Argentinian counterpart. We were contacted about a year ago asking about the possible return of the statue, as you will have heard, following its removal from Argentina in 1982 via the Falklands, and has been with us in Britain up to the present. So this event was really, I think, an appropriate opportunity to extend a gesture of reconciliation, one military bishop to another.
Tell us about what Pope Francis was like. He seemed to be engaged in this issue.
Well, it's interesting, of course, being from Argentina, I suspect he had a particular interest and he would appreciate the devotion to Our Lady of Luján, which is so important in Argentina. So I suspect that was his motive for wanting to be so involved with the exchange today. And Pope Francis, of course, as we all know, is such a warm and benign leader to us that his presence was a huge honor. It was a wonderful occasion, and everybody was thrilled, as you can imagine, by his presence at such an important moment as that, and to give it his blessing, and for it to be therefore such a very high-profile gesture of reconciliation after so many years.
I'm sure it was. Father Michael, I want to ask you about your background. You're the first Catholic priest with a first-star ranking to hold your position in the Royal Army Chaplains Department. So tell us more about your role in serving military men who are predominantly Protestant or even non-religious.
I've been very fortunate. I've been an Army chaplain for coming up for 23 years now. I have a role, obviously, specifically as a Catholic, as the principal Roman Catholic chaplain to the Army. So, and I also have the care of 2 Army garrison churches, which are nearby where I work in Army headquarters in Andover. So I have a wonderful working relationship with chaplains, colleagues who I've known, many of them for many, many years, of other denominations.
Well, it is such an important ministry, and one that I'm sure Catholics around the world will continue to pray for chaplains who continue to serve wherever they may be. Father Michael Fava, UK Deputy Chaplain General, thank you so much for talking with us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Coming up, an update on a Catholic teenager's lawsuit against the Washington Post, and analysis of pro-life measures in several states. President Trump is voicing his support for a Catholic high school student suing the Washington Post. In a tweet, the president says he agrees with the decision by a federal judge in Kentucky to reopen part of the student's lawsuit. Nicholas Sandman accuses the newspaper of defamatory statements following his January encounter with a Native American man on the day of the March for Life. Sandman is seeking $250 million in damages. His lawyer says reopening the lawsuit is a huge win. The suit highlights 7 Washington Post articles and 3 social media posts they say were targeting and bullying Sandman. A federal judge temporarily blocks Alabama's near total ban on abortion from taking effect next month and calls the law unconstitutional. The Alabama Human Life Protection Act would make performing an abortion at any stage of pregnancy a felony. Convicted abortion providers could face life in prison. There are a couple of exceptions. One is if there's a serious health risk to the mother, or if the baby has a lethal condition that would cause the child to die shortly after birth. Joining me now with her analysis is Tina Whittington, Executive Vice President of Students for Life of America. Tina, welcome back to the newscast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Many supporters of this pro-life legislation in Alabama anticipated there would be attempts to block it. What's your reaction to this injunction in particular and what it means for the pro-life movement in Alabama?
I would say we're not surprised. This is how the abortion lobby, this is how Planned Parenthood works. When this legislation gets pushed forward, their pockets are bigger. They take it to the courts because they know they can win at the courts, and they know they've got a lot of justices in their pockets, and they can create this sort of federal block.
In 2018, the people of Alabama overwhelmingly approved a constitutional amendment to declare the state a pro-life state. So do you think this judge's ruling then signals some sort of disconnect then with what the people want?
Absolutely. So we did some polling earlier this year with millennials, and we found that 65% want to be able to vote on abortion. They want to have a say, and we're seeing this in states across the country. People want to say in what happens with abortion in their state. And so, yeah, it's total disregard. It's obviously legislating from the bench in a very big way. And we know that if they can keep it going up the courts, then there's a possibility that they'll block it altogether.
And speaking of the courts, the judge wrote in his accompanying opinion that Alabama's abortion ban, quote, diminishes the capacity of women to act in society and make reproductive decisions. What's your response to that?
I think we honor women the most when we support them in choosing life and give them the option of resources, real help. And I think there's this misnomer within people that support abortion. They think it's real help for women, and it's not. It doesn't help a woman. It doesn't help her overcome her poverty. It doesn't help her finish her education. There's so many things it doesn't help, but we as a pro-life community can come in and give her resources, maternity homes, pregnancy centers, churches that have great resources, people that open their homes so that women can come and live with them while they're trying to figure out how to get their life on the right path. And we know that's when we win. That's when we support women. Abortion doesn't make us equal to men. Supporting us to choose life makes us equal in society.
It's why the work the pro-lifers do is so important.
Yeah.
Federal courts have blocked similar abortion bans in Georgia, Kentucky, Mississippi. Are you hopeful at all the Supreme Court could potentially take this up?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we already know they took the Louisiana case. I don't know when they're going to be hearing that yet, but we know that the more times these come up and get blocked and the different circuits disagree on how they resolve the issues, it goes up to the Supreme Court, and every one of these is an opportunity to overturn Roe.
Okay, very interesting. Well, obviously, like I said, it's just another encouragement for pro-lifers to continue to speak out on the issue. Tina Whittington, Executive Vice President of Students for Life of America, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Up next, an advocate for religious freedom updates us on his fight against human trafficking. And meet the newest addition to the EWTN News Nightly family. Police in Britain are searching for 2 brothers in connection with the death of 39 people who were found dead in a truck container in southeastern England. The 2 men are from Northern Ireland. They're wanted of suspicion of manslaughter and human trafficking. Another suspect has already been arrested. The identities of the victims, 8 women and 31 men, have not been released, but authorities believe they were from China or Vietnam and may have been exploited by a human trafficking ring. Joining us now to talk more about the situation in Britain is Lord David Alton, trustee of the Arise Foundation to fight human trafficking. He's in New York City advocating on behalf of human trafficking victims around the world. Lord Alton is also a member of the House of Lords and previously spent 18 years in the House of Commons. Lord Alton, welcome into the newscast.
Thank you.
Regarding the disturbing discovery, what do we know about the identity of the victims so far?
Well, what we saw on our television sets in England on Saturday evening were deeply moving pictures coming from the Catholic Church in the village where many of the 39 came from. And they were young people. There was an extraordinary vigil taking place as people were coming to terms with the loss of loved ones. What we know is that these were young people trying to get a better life, trying to earn some money in order to send back to help their impoverished families. And there was an interview, for instance, with one man who was seriously ill, and he was hoping that his only son was going to raise some money in order to be able to help with his medical care. So he'd lost his son, he'd lost all their money, and he was absolutely bereft. And I think we've got to come to terms with not just the statistics. There are some estimated 40 million people trafficked in modern-day slavery around the world. And yes, it needs people like the historic figure William Wilberforce, the great Christian who campaigned against transatlantic slavery. It needs us in the church today to speak out more strongly about this trade in human beings and to create an honest system. There are wonderful sisters working on the ground all around the world, religious sisters who are helping people so that they don't need to make these perilous journeys. And that's what the Arise Foundation tries to do, to help those sisters stop the trafficking in the first place.
Very good. Well, obviously, we'll continue to follow this situation with human trafficking, this case in particular, and obviously the problem around the world. Staying in the United Kingdom, Lord Alton, I want to ask you, because abortion and same-sex marriage were legalized in Northern Ireland earlier this month. It's a story we've been following. Is there anything the faithful there can do to reverse this?
Well, certainly when the Northern Ireland Assembly is eventually re-established and the Northern Ireland Executive established, they can then repeal the law if they so wish. But the problem is, it's much more difficult to get rid of abortion laws once they've been imposed than it is to stop them in the first place. And this needn't have happened. It was because of politicians at Westminster overruling devolved government, overruling power sharing, who imposed the abortion legislation on Northern Ireland. And it's even more extreme than the legislation that we have in the rest of Great Britain, where one baby is aborted every 3 minutes, 600 every working day, 9 million since the legislation was first enacted. And the tragic thing about Northern Ireland is it was an abortion-free area. So 100,000 people are alive in Northern Ireland today because abortion was never legalised in the first place. And a majority of women, for instance, in Northern Ireland did not want this imposed legislation. All the polls show that. A majority of the Assembly didn't want it. But their failure to come together in the Assembly allowed this Westminster legislation to be imposed. And the real tragedy is that, yes, 3,500 people died in the Northern Ireland Troubles, 46,000 were injured. But those numbers will be like nothing in comparison with the numbers of babies, innocent lives that will be taken as a consequence of this tragic legislation.
Some disturbing statistics there, but we appreciate your bringing that to light, obviously talking to us about both the abortion issue as well as the human trafficking issue. Lord David Alton, trustee of the Arise Foundation, who spent 18 years as a member of the House of Commons, thank you so much for joining us.
It's been a great pleasure. Thank you.
We have some good news to share tonight. Our EWTN family is growing. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi and his wife Catherine are the proud parents of a new baby girl. Mary Rose Calvi was born yesterday, and we're told mom and baby are both doing well. Mary Rose will soon join her 2 big brothers and sister at home. We'd like to congratulate the entire Calvi family. Mary Rose is a beautiful blessing. And of course, we can't wait to meet her here in our Washington office as well. And with that, we conclude our newscast for tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.